Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? The first story is perhaps compelling evidence that robots really will not be the destruction of humanity. The Nightscope security robot is meant to provide a point of contact for the public, and one has been patrolling a park since June. The park in Los Angeles was patrolled by the robot, and in theory, if someone encountered trouble, they would be able to hail the robot and it would provide a point of contact to the police. It turns out the police don't have a system in place for that to happen. Therefore, the HP RoboCop is unable to do its job. What it does instead is provide a phone contact to the manufacturer of the robot, who then pass on the information to the police. How this has all come to light is that a woman needed to hail the robot as she was in trouble and found that all the robot would say to her was, "Please move out of the way." The next story relates to an invasive species that has been found in Georgia waters. The northern snakehead fish can both breathe on land and live in water quite happily. This means it's capable of traveling considerable distances. It can also outcompete, outsurvive, and ultimately outbreed native species of fish. This is what has Georgia officials so very worried, and they want to kill it as quickly and effectively as possible. The important reason for the desire to remove this fish from local water in Georgia is that disrupting local native fish populations can have huge effects on the food chain. Removing fish can have effects on the bird population, plant population, and even some mammals, let alone those who fish specifically for native fish. The problem in this case comes from the fact that for many years the northern snakehead was sold as a pet. That was until 2002, when the US Fish and Wildlife Service added it to its injurious wildlife list. According to the Chesapeake Bay program, the fish can survive for a long period of time in mud. They can also breathe air through an air bladder. This is perhaps one of the things that Chesapeake is less famous for. The fish can grow quite large at just under a meter. It can also weigh quite a lot at 8 kilograms. The fish is also carnivorous, eating other fish, which further adds to the risk of it displacing local native wildlife, including fish, amphibians, and shellfish. Georgia's Department of Natural Resources is asking fishers to not only identify and kill these fish, but to photograph them and report the location to them. This will allow the department to track the spread of an invasive species and prospectively take action to further curtail the spread. The next piece of news is less about limiting the spread and survivability of an organism and instead encouraging it. Japanese scientists have kept mouse brain tissue samples alive for weeks after the animal was euthanized. In the past, this channel has reported on pig brains that have been kept alive for hours. In this case, the Japanese researchers have taken the same idea and sustained it for 25 days. The team's research used a new method involving a specialized device called a microfluidic device. They have small channels that deliver fluid to the tissues, very much like regular vascular tissue does. The advantage for this over a more standard method like culture tissues is that they can provide specific fluid delivery for both egress of waste and ingress of nutrition. Further to this, each device can be made to custom specifications. This means you can model specific pathologies or circumstances as wanted. This is useful, especially if you are looking at cell adaptation or development to a specific condition or state. The device uses the principles of osmosis to achieve this. It uses a semi-permeable membrane made of silicon that allows a small amount of fluid to perfuse through it. This allows the tissue sample or cells to still have gas exchange as they are not swimming in media, but there is not so little that the tissue sample or cells dry out. This balance is important to ensure the cells remain viable, or in this case, brain tissue samples. The way the researchers know how long it worked for is simple but elegant. They tied in a fluorescence protein to be expressed with circadian rhythms. This means it would rise and fall following a specific schedule. This meant that they could track each of these movements over the 25 days, and they found that it continued to be expressed the whole time. There was only a slight decline over that period, and the only reason it lasted for 25 days is that is when the experiment was cut off. The researchers expect that it could last for over 100 days. This development could be important in the long term, especially for transplantable organs, as it would allow them to be moved long distance. However, this particular development is a long way from there. In far less upbeat and positive news, the United States of America has achieved a record with a significant increase in the STD rate. STDs, or sexually transmitted diseases. This includes a variety of unpleasant conditions that can have both short and long-term effects on the mind and reproductive system, let alone the body. Diseases like syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia. According to the CDC, more than 115,000 cases of syphilis, 580,000 cases of gonorrhea, and 1.7 million cases of chlamydia were reported in the last year. Considering that gonorrhea alone is becoming treatment resistant, syphilis is also treatment resistant, and chlamydia may not be far away, this is a cause for concern. Add to that, this is the 5th increase in a row. That means the last time there was a decrease in the sexually transmitted disease rate was 2014, and this year is 100,000 more than last year. Of these 100,000, 40% of the cases related to syphilis were congenital, meaning it was passed from mother to baby, which has a carry-on effect to the number of babies dying from congenital syphilis, increasing by 22% to nearly 100 babies a year. The CDC believes 3 factors are contributing most significantly to this increase. The first is socio-economic and drug use factors. The second is a lack of use of protection, particularly among young people who are either gay or bisexual. Finally, a reduction to fundings for healthcare programs at local and state levels. This leads to a lack of knowledge, a lack of use of methods that could prevent this from happening, and the most vulnerable populations being most heavily affected and conditions becoming entrenched. Perhaps the simplest action that can be taken to prevent transmission of these diseases is the use of protection. In an example of protection having exactly the opposite effect, an Australian man has received first-degree burns from wearing a high-visibility safety vest. A warning has been issued about working in extreme heat conditions wearing the protective equipment, as the reflective surface on this particular garment overheated and caused the man to have first-degree burns across his back. The case study is perhaps one of the more unusual and interesting ones. The man presented at the emergency department complaining about a rash. The doctors noted that the rash lined up with the reflective stripe on his safety vest. As he was a field environmental engineer, he worked outdoors for extended periods. Being Australia, outdoors means being in an uncomfortable environment, often with lots of heat and light. The man says that his safety vest became uncomfortable when worn in sunshine, but thought nothing more of it. Fortunately for this person, they will recover, as the degree of damage is only on par with relatively minor sunburn. But consider this: he was wearing a garment that's intended to reflect light. It does so from being made with a tape with small glass or silicone type material embedded in it that reflects light. In this case, the light was reflecting on it, but it was also absorbing a considerable amount of energy. This in turn was passed on, resulting in the burns he received. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.